I suppose if I was going to give this this little monologue a title, it would be something like "How Easily People Are Brainwashed," or something like that. And it kind of came out of a couple of interviews I did on Apostate Alex's channel. I didn't really want to sort of hijack his, because it's his channel, his content, so I didn't want to go off into too much depth on that. So it just made sense to kind of create my own content. And basically, what I really want to say, I think, is that if there's one thing that the whole Scientology experience taught me, and anybody that hasn't seen the interviews, in a nutshell, I can summarise, I think, 2.5 hours worth in a couple of sentences. Basically, I was in Scientology from 1981 till 2009, on and off. 5 of those years were in the Sea Org, which is the Sea Organisation, which is like the clergy or brotherhood, if you will. Sea Org members signed a billionaire contract, so I did that for 5 years between 82 and 87, not 82 and 85, as I said in Alex's interview incorrectly. And then I was a sort of what they call a public Scientologist for all the other years after that. And so I talked quite a bit about my experience in Scientology and also coming out of Scientology. But I've kind of moved on from Scientology. What I wanted to create my own content for was to try, and I'm still crystallizing my thoughts on this. This is very much work in progress, but I did touch on this in the interviews with Alex, and it's this. One thing I did learn is a lot about how, in practice, in reality, how mind control works, how brainwashing works. Brainwashing is a very interesting term. I don't like to use it particularly because it means everything and nothing. The definition of it depends on the, on your. It's a very subjective term. But if you just take brainwashing to mean the conditioning of someone's thoughts and beliefs and to mould them in a particular way, let's just take that rudimentary definition. So I learned quite a lot about how brainwashing works and the tools that are used to brainwash people. So those tools being, for example, control of information, specifically what information is okay and what sort of information is not okay. The use of fear, so that's self-explanatory, how you can make people afraid of doing or going in one direction. And there are more subtle, less obvious techniques in brainwashing, such as the use of suggestion via NLP method, neuro-linguistic programming methods. So the use of language is a whole. That's worthy of a whole talk, or in its own right. But in general terms, and the thing that's really brought it to my attention and made me want to do some very specific content on it is because the last 3 years, that being since the spring of 2020, so it's pretty much exactly 3 years now, to me has been certainly the most interesting 3 years of my lifetime. I would suggest it's been the 3 most significant years, possibly in our history. I see things happening now that are going to completely change the world we live in. And even if there is going to be a world that we live in. And what's really, what I want to focus on isn't the environment, because there's a whole debate about climate change and whether there will be a planet for us to live on because of global warming and CO2 emissions and all that stuff. That's not what I mean. Although my personal opinion is that from everything that I've looked at, and I have done a fair bit of research on this, no doubt the environment is, the climate is changing, as it always has done throughout history. The degree to which it's man-made or not is highly debatable. But whether it's man-made or not, man has to adapt to the changing climate, as man has always had to adapt to a changing climate. It was only a few hundred years ago when there was a mini ice age in this country. You could have, they did race horses up and down the River Thames because the Thames froze over so thoroughly, the ice was so thick you could safely race horses on it. Go back a few hundred years before that and they were growing grapevines as far north as Manchester because it was that warm. So the climate always changes. But I'm not interested. That's not my thing. There's plenty of other much better informed places you could get information about climate change, net zero, and all that stuff. My interest is in the use of manipulation and control of data and information, and how populations are being subjugated, let's say, or manipulated in a certain direction, with the net result that our freedoms, such as they are, will be eroded to the point that we almost don't have any. I think already the idea of freedom in the society, the way it's set up, is such an illusory concept, and the only people that have any freedom are the super rich, basically. Those that have been able to gain so much financial wealth that they can just opt out of the system. The only crime you can really commit in this society is being broke, is not having any money. So it's pretty obvious to me that and especially since 2020, in the last 3 years, there are forces at play that are determined to make ordinary people's lives little more, that we become little more than perfect consumers. Digital identities that do what we're told, go where we're told to, when we're told to, and, to quote Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, WEF, to own nothing and be happy. Now, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's his words. That's where this is all headed. And it's not a place where I want my children to go. I'm 61 years old. If I'm lucky, I've got another 20 years, maybe 30 years left in me, but I've got a youngish family. I've got a 21-year-old and I've got a nearly 12-year-old. And it's for them that I'm concerned, and I would want to to do anything, to do my bit, if I can do anything, to alert people to what's happening. So, for example, let me try and be a little bit more specific. And because this is my channel, I'm just going to say it like it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat this whatsoever. I don't think that this will get taken down by YouTube because A, I'm insignificant, and B, even the masters of the highly censored YouTube must be waking up to some degree. So I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The so-called coronavirus pandemic was, I believe, and I have done quite a lot of research on this, a very carefully orchestrated, well planned out event, more or less from beginning to end. And how this relates to thought control is that if you follow a hypnotist's rhythm or playbook, it usually starts with a confusion. Putting people in a state of, you're throwing them off balance. One obvious way of, very blatant way of doing that on an individual level is you just take somebody's hand and you just put it up to their forehead like that, and that kind of like throws them off balance, and then you can throw a command up, and it's something that Darren Brown talks about. So you put people in this state of sort of fear and confusion with the images in the first event of people, for example, in China apparently just convulsing and dropping down dead with this deadly new virus, and you see on your TV all these images of intensive care wards apparently bursting at the seams with these desperately ill people that are dying of this pandemic. So you're inducing an incredible state of fear into the population. Then you sort of say, well, don't worry, we've got the solution coming down the line. So people are now in a state of anxiety and fear, and they're in a receptive state to take on board whatever the authorities are saying. And in this particular case, it was very interesting. The use of the word science, the way the word science was bandied around, was very interesting. And we're going to follow the science, all this stuff, we'll do things, the science is king. But actually, as it's turned out, it was nothing to do with science. Actual science just didn't come into play. Again, I'm not going to go into all the specifics of this because it would be way too long, but obviously for any sort of risk-benefit analysis to be done on, first of all, on the whole lockdown thing, there was no risk-benefit analysis done, not even a rudimentary one. It was all done on the strength of be terrified of this awful pandemic that's going, that could kill millions and millions of people around the world. I think it was Professor Neil Ferguson, on whose reports the UK government based their strategy on, and he was saying, there'll be a good 500,000 deaths in the UK, from this pandemic. Utter nonsense. But that was the science. And then, of course, so still in this state of fear, then the people are told, well, don't worry, people are working really hard. Top scientists are working on this panacea, this light at the end of the tunnel, this vaccine which is going to solve everything. And sure enough, within 6 months, miraculously, this vaccine appeared, which was going to solve, get us out of this terrible state, this terrible condition. Now, I'm not a scientist, but anybody can tell you that it takes years of research and testing to come up with a vaccine that you know is going to be actually safe and effective, and yet without any evidence to back this up, pretty much all governments around the world saying it's safe and effective. It's safe and effective. Think of that about those two words. Safe, implying that there's little or no side effects to be had from it. Effective, as in it's going to do the job of stopping you getting the virus and passing it on to others. Okay, so one bit at a time. Is it safe? No, it's clearly not safe. There are hundreds of thousands. I didn't do the calculation on this, but I think I'll do the maths on this in a second. But I would say even in this country, millions of adverse side effects from the vaccine. Conservatively, 1 in 800 people have suffered an adverse event, and that 1 in 800 figure is based on government Office of National Statistics data from people. From people that have reported. I'm going to smoke while I do this, if you don't mind, because I do smoke. Nicotine's apparently quite good repellent of the vaccine. I never got COVID. By the way, I never got vaccinated. Not because I was all smug and wise and clever. It just didn't pass the smell test to me. When they started talking about it, I thought, something just doesn't feel right. And I did say to my friends at the time, on one particular WhatsApp group, I had a very interesting to and fro with a highly intelligent fellow. I won't name him for obvious reasons, but he was outraged by my position, and not that I was trying to sell my position, I was just saying what my position was. And he said, well, effectively, I'm not going to have anything to do with you then, and sort of virtually disconnected me, just like in Scientology. I was a non-believer. I was disconnected, and that happened. Yeah, he wasn't the only one. So, oh yeah. That's right, 1 in 800. Now, based on the ONS figures, it's almost certainly way higher than that. But let's just say it's 1 in 800. That's an awful lot of people, and that's just in this country. So it doesn't pass the safe. What's the word? Can't think of the word. I might try and edit this bit out. I'm not very good at video editing. Anyway, you can't put a tick next to that one and say it's safe. All right. Well, okay? Maybe not safe, but surely then it's effective. Must be effective then. Okay. Well, what does effective mean? So first of all, by the way, just going back to the safe thing. It's now incontrovertibly true. Is that a word? It's now the evidence is incontrovertible that Pfizer, for example, which is the biggest of the 4 big companies that were producing vaccines, a reanalysis of their own testing data, which they wanted locked up for 75 years, by the way, but weren't able to. But even an analysis of their own data showed that this vaccine had very serious side effects in some people, not in everybody, but in some people. Okay, so it doesn't pass the safe, whatever that word is. It doesn't tick that box. Is it effective? Well, effective is an interesting word, isn't it? So we were told that it was not just effective in stopping us getting the virus, but in transmission, onward transmission. In other words, if you took the virus, you were being took the vaccine, you were being socially responsible, because the virus could not then be transmitted onwards from you to other people. So the messaging was very forceful and very unambiguous that you were being irresponsible if you did not take this vaccine. And by the way, and this has been covered again in much more detail than I'm going to, but it's not a vaccine by any medical definition of what a vaccine meant up till the year 2020. The definition has been changed to make this vaccine fit, I believe, but it's not a vaccine in the conventional sense, and I'm not going to go into the biology of that, because A, I don't understand it very well, and B, it's been covered much more thoroughly by other people. So it's not effective in preventing onward transmission. And again, Pfizer knew this from the very outset, but they didn't impress upon the governments and the medical regulatory authorities that they knew that. Far from it. They were very happy to have this line forwarded on. And the regulatory bodies like the CDC and the MHRA, etc., who had a responsibility for making sure that the information being imparted was factual, accurate, and was enabling people to make informed consent about these things, who are incidentally in large part funded by the pharmaceutical companies and, yes, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they had a responsibility to pass on this information, but all the information that they were passing on to the public was the information that had been given to them by the pharmaceutical companies, i.e. Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. So they weren't doing any independent research. There was no actual science behind this at all. So this use of the word science was absolutely fascinating. So that deals with the safe and effective. It was neither of those things. And again, on the effectiveness thing, initially you're told it's 100% effective. Well, that slid down very rapidly. Russell Brand did a very, very funny piece on this a little while ago. He showed some snippets of when they were saying it's 100% effective, and over time it gradually diminished down to like 0% effective. And in actual fact, not only does any imagined immunity that you get from the vaccine wane after quite a short period of time, but the vaccine, if it was effective at all, was effective against the original strain of COVID-19. Now we're in Omicron or some even lower variant of that. It has no impact whatsoever. It doesn't pass any risk-benefit analysis whatsoever. You would literally have to vaccinate millions of children, for example, under the age of 11, to save one from hospitalisation from COVID. And yet, of those millions that you're vaccinating, thousands of them are going to suffer serious adverse events or effects from the vaccine. So all this is going on. And here we are in April 2023. The dam is beginning to break a little bit. There's a very interesting court case going on in South Africa. The South African government is taking on Pfizer toe to toe. That'll be a very interesting case. Switzerland, I believe, has now stopped the vaccine rollout program. But first of all, a lot of the damage has already been done, and the vaccines are still being administered to people who just don't need them or are likely to suffer adverse effects, still going on a daily basis. Add into all of that the real cute irony in the whole thing is that you and I are paying for this. We are quite literally paying these huge, huge pharmaceutical giants with their unlimited amounts of spend on lobbying and marketing to effectively poison us. I'm sorry, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, just telling it like I see it. I don't want to go back into a religious theme on this, but Satan himself could not have devised a more cunning, a more devious plan than making the conditions, creating the conditions which the population, the ordinary people, were paying for themselves to be poisoned. It's brilliant in its cunningness, but how can you say that that's anything other than plain evil? I can't see it as anything other than plain evil. But my point here is all about how we've been brainwashed to do this in the first place. If you take yourself out of that whole situation and stand 3 feet behind it and just look at it from an exterior point of view, you must look at this and think, what the fuck are we doing? And yet here we are doing it. 3/4, I believe, 5.4 something billion of the world's population have taken this completely, well, at best experimental. It may not be experimental. It may be that it was by design. I still haven't clarified to my own satisfaction whether this was all by design or it was purely motivated by greed and profit and money. But either way, 5.4 billion people were persuaded to take this concoction, this messenger RNA technology, which has very distinct, very unique properties within the body. Just look up lipid nanoparticles and how they work and how they can reside in all the organs of the body. So my point to all this, and the angle I'm coming at this from is about messaging and thought control and brainwashing. How are we able to how have we allowed ourselves to become so malleable, so gullible, so pliable that 3/4 of us have gone down this route and paid for the privilege? It's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? And there are all sorts of books and information which partly explain this. I referenced Derren Brown in one of my videos with Alex. There's another good one, reference guy called Edward Bernays, Bernays, called Propaganda, the Public Mind in the Making. There's lots of good books and good information out there explaining how they're able to do this. They. Now, who is they? This is the other thing I just wanted to dwell on a bit, because when you start talking about the topics that I'm talking about now, you quickly get labelled a conspiracy theorist. Well, first of all, somebody said to me the other day, conspiracy theory. That's just like a spoiler alert for what's going to happen in 6 months' time, which is proving to be true a lot of the time. But second of all, where a conspiracy theory can be challenged, sort of legitimately, is that, well, who is the they? Unless you can define who they are and why they are doing what they are doing, then a conspiracy theory doesn't stack up. So here's my take, here's my view on that. I first of all, what I don't believe is that there is a cabal of 12 or 15 or a couple of dozen people who sit round this table in a smoky room fiendishly conjuring up these wicked plans to dominate the world. Although I haven't ruled that out as a possibility. But I think it's more serendipitous that organisations like the WEF, the WHO, have very similar objectives to the likes of Bill Gates, for example, in as much as it's all about power and control. I mean, Klaus Schwab, head of the WEF, has got a very interesting background, and I've forgotten his name. There's a brilliant journalist, Johnny something or other, I follow on Twitter, who's done a very deep dive into Klaus Schwab and what he's all about. So you've got organisations like the WEF. So it's the sort of like minds coming together in an almost not quite accidental way, but so they would be the heads of these organisations, and Bill Gates. And it's not just about money. That is a huge part of it. But once you've got umpty-ump billion pounds at your disposal, it becomes much more about power and control than it does about money, because, well, there's only so many private islands and private jets you can buy. So having 100 billion versus 10 billion is no real difference, is it? So you reach a point, the super rich reach a point where it's more about power and control. So then the question becomes, power and control to what end? For what reason? So why would these entities want to introduce a digital ID, for example? Okay, so you can forget completely that it's all about our convenience, because that is the line that's being used. Yes, it'll be so much more convenient just to have one ID that you'll only have to produce when you're asked for at shops or airports or whatever, and it'll enable you to do this and that and the other, and it'll be fantastically convenient. Absolute garbage. That's surveys have already suggested that even the unawakened people around the world generally don't want this. Digital ID, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. So the objective there being to have a more or less cashless society with a blockchain-based currency, a la Bitcoin, except with the big difference is that Bitcoin is completely centralized, whereas CBDCs are completely, did I say centralized? Bitcoin is completely decentralized, whereas CBDCs are completely centralized. So the operating authority in each jurisdiction or area, let's say the United Kingdom, let's say it was the Bank of England, would be able to control exactly how, when, and where your money is spent. It could even have an expiry date, so if you haven't spent it by a certain time, and so on. So without getting into all that, so you've got digital IDs, you've got central bank digital currencies, you've got 15-minute cities coming down the road, and again, there's a lot of content out there about 15-minute cities, so I won't go into all that. The question is, why? What's behind that, the push to have all these things, which are, the net result is quite obviously a more compliant, a more obedient population, and one which, again, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's right there on the WF website, a society in which we own nothing but are happy. You own nothing and be happy. It's literally, it's part of the Great Reset. That's, and again, it's called the Great Reset. It's like it's there in plain sight. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's right there on a WF website. The Great Reset. So really, what I'm coming to in a very roundabout way, after 36 minutes already of rambling, is why? Who's getting off on this, and what is the point really? And I'm going to leave that slightly open-ended because I don't have an answer to that question. I'm just posing it as a question, but it can only be one of two or three things. It could be literally pure evil, an actual desire to depopulate the planet. And there are certainly some people I've spoken to can make a very credible argument that is the case. That is what's being. That is the objective. That is the plan. But to depopulate the planet to such a point where there's literally only a few 100,000 people. That's one possibility. Another possibility is just because power obviously corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's just purely a power hard-on. They just get they just literally just sort of get off on it, on controlling and pushing people around. I'm trying to think what any third option could be. I don't. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's got to be one of those two things. Maybe it is a. Let's put it this way. Whatever the motivations are, they're certainly not benign and generous. None of these measures are enabling people to become more free, more self-determined, more in control of their own destiny, more able to achieve higher states of consciousness and awareness, more compassion, more love. None of these measures are enhancing the individual state of being and state of and health and happiness and survival. So whatever the motives are, they must be nefarious. But beyond that, I'll just leave it as an open-ended question. And at nearly 40 minutes, I think we'll call that quite enough for one day. Thank you for listening.